morning. So the theme that we're given this morning is God gathers us together in safe shelter. It feels really ironic after this week that someone walked into a mosque and started mowing people down with their gun. It feels ironic after Pittsburgh, where somebody did the same thing in a synagogue. In another way, it feels ironic because of the ongoing scandal of abuse of children by priests, and we as Protestants are much better at sweeping it under the rug even than the Catholics are. It happens in Mennonite churches and churches of the Brethren as well. We don't talk about that. So God gathers us together in safe shelter. The passages that were read are really visual. There's lots of really strong visual images there. And part of me said, well, maybe it's almost time to get a screen up here so we could do some visuals. And then I realized that really most of us here are adults and we can read books without pictures already. And use our imaginations. We do this all the time. And the reality is any picture we would put up there about Abraham and Sarah would just be automatically wrong in some significant way that we wouldn't even know is wrong. So let's use our imaginations. And let's start with Genesis. So God appears to Abraham and says, Abraham, I'm your God. I'm going to give you all this stuff. Just stuff. This is the third time now that God has appeared to Abraham in this story and made basically the same promises every time. Every time the promise gets a bit bigger, but every time Abraham ends the story with nothing more than he started with except promise. And this time God makes three specific promises, and the first one is a general promise, stuff. And the second one is more specific, family. And the third one is even more concrete, land. You're going to get all of this land. Wow, that's a good thing. But Abraham's got a different perspective on things. Abraham says, well, yeah, okay, God, stuff, but so what? I've got no descendants. Who am I going to pass it on to? And for us, this is really good to remember that, you know, there's more to this story than just, there's more to our story than just how we're doing this week, or this month, or this quarter, or this fiscal year. That Abraham wants us to have this long-term perspective of saying, well, the next generation. And that's really, really critical in our day because of all the stuff that's happening, like, for example, with climate change. That climate change isn't, well, didn't rain today, why should we worry? Right? Looks fine outside now, why would this be a problem? And you know, the Bible wants to drag us into a longer perspective and say, well, what about the next generation? And what about the generation after that? Because Abraham is supposed to go from, you know, him and his wife to as many as you can count of stars. Right? So let's throw out a number here, 10,000. How many generations is it going to take to get from 2 to 10,000? Well, even if you have 10 kids every time, it's going to take you a while to get to 10,000. Right? And, you know, if the climate scientists are even half right, you know, by that time that many generations from now has come, there won't be a Florida anymore. Imagine that. That's a big thing. So we got to start, right, recognizing that there's this longer-term perspective that goes on here. And then it says that Abraham believed God, and God says, that's as good as righteousness. It's one of these funny verses because Paul later takes that verse and says, see, the Bible proves by this verse that you don't need works, you just need faith. That's all you need. And then a few years later, James turns around and says, see, this verse proves that you don't just need faith, you need works too. Because Abraham believed God and then he went and did something. He didn't just sit on his butt and do nothing. And he had to go out there and do it. So Abraham believes God. And then he turns around and says, but how do I know? Abraham believes God, he just doesn't trust him. Which is pretty, important here too. No, yeah, no, I don't trust you. And that's a really important thing. Right? Because if you can't trust God, who can you trust? And I think ultimately the answer is nobody. There is nobody you can trust, in the sense that we are all going to let each other down at some point. There are people in our society today who are looking for their perfect mate, who will be their ultimate everything for the rest of their lives. And with that sort of ideal, you wonder how anybody stays married anymore, because that ain't ever going to happen. And, you know, like we are gathered together here at Morgantown Church of the Brethren in God willing, safe shelter, but we're going to let each other down. That there's going to be something going on in your life, and you're going to come and talk to me about it, and I'm going to be distracted, I'm going to make some stupid comment, and I'm going to walk away. But then Jen will be there. And Jen will say, yeah, Wes, he's having a bad day, can I help you? Or maybe you're going to tell Jen, and Jen's having a bad day, and she's just not going to pay attention, but that's okay, because Amy's going to be there. And this is how community should work, at least. And this is what we try to do. That we are all going to fail one another at some point. And God willing, there is going to be somebody else there to pick us up. To say, yeah, we've all got those days. Can I help? And maybe it's emotional, and maybe it's physical, and you know, whatever we need. Hopefully we can help each other out in those times. That's why God gathers us together in communities, and not just in twos and in threes. So then, God sets up this really obviously visual, visceral thing for Abraham. He's got to take these animals, he's got to slice them in two. I noticed this week that whoever wrote this was not a farmer. Because the first thing Abraham's supposed to do is he's supposed to take a 3-year-old heifer. Shouldn't be a 3-year-old heifer. If a heifer is 3 years old, it's already been turned into beef. Because, you know, because a heifer is just a cow who hasn't given birth yet. And they shouldn't get to 3 years old without giving birth. Right? If they get that old, they're obviously barren, and it's time to turn them into a hamburger. And so some non-farmer wrote this. But anyway. Right, so he's supposed to take these animals and split them apart, and then, right, so that, I don't want to run over that too quickly. When was the last time you cut a cow in half? Yeah, I'm sure, right, I'm sure. Has anyone here ever cut a cow in half? And why would you cut a cow in half, right? Well, you know.
Have you? She's asking.
I have been right beside cows being cut in half by the thousands. I have seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cows being cut in half. Does that count?
Yeah.
But I didn't do the cutting. There's a guy with a big saw. He'd cut them in half. Anyway. So at least I know what this looks like. Although I'm sure Abraham didn't have a big saw. Anyway. So then, it says that a deep and terrifying darkness came over Abraham. Which is, again, ironic, because what's the very first word that God says to Abraham when he comes? What's always the first word that God says when God shows up, or an angel shows up? What's the first phrase, always? Don't be afraid, right? And suddenly, we get a deep and terrifying darkness. And, right? Abraham is living in a world before light pollution. Campfires don't make a lot of light pollution. And so, right, even the basic darkness is pretty dark. And so if you get a deep and terrifying darkness on top of that, it's dark. And then God appears in these very visual, bright images of a fire pot and a flaming torch. And it's not like I would show you a flaming torch here, because there's so much light around that a flaming torch wouldn't even make a dent in anything except it smoke a bit. But, you know, if it's dark, 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 terrifying, dark. And suddenly a flaming torch would be just this amazing thing. And God says, see, I'm here. I am really here. Which is, again, such an amazing image, because there are people all over the world today living in deep and terrifying darkness. There are people whose lives are consumed in fear. Some of them rightfully so. Some of them are afraid of brown people. So, but for both of those things there needs to be light. If your fear is real, you need real light. If your fear is of people who look different than you, you really need some light in your world too. So then the gospel comes to us too. And it's an interesting story because it's about Jesus and the Pharisees. And if you grew up in the church, you would immediately go, ooh, Pharisees, bad guys. Because that's sort of the quintessential bad guys in the Gospels, is the Pharisees. And here we have a different picture, and this is Luke. And Luke in his Gospel, when he writes, his picture of the Pharisees isn't quite that straightforward. It isn't that simple. There's a number of times in the New Testament, in Luke, where the Pharisees are not quite the good guys, but not as sort of obviously the bad guys as in the other Gospels. And so the Pharisees come and warn Jesus. The Pharisees come and say, hey, Herod's going to kill you. Get away. That's a good thing. And Jesus says, you go tell that fox. And part of what Jesus is doing here, I think, is he's saying, how did you know? How did you know what Herod's thinking? You've got this access, right? You're in collusion with this system. Which would have been a hard thing for a Pharisee to admit, because the Pharisees were all about purity. They were all about keeping away from. And Jesus says, no, you're in collusion with that whole system. You're bound up in that whole system. Because if you know what Herod is thinking, you're part of it. And I was thinking about that this week too, because one of the differences about my time in Morgantown here is how much I've become aware or become part of the political system around here. Not part of, but connected to, right? There's a member of the city council, like right over there. And I know, like, most of the city council, and I know people who are in the state legislature. And I've never known these things before. And if you're a Kansas Mennonite, politics is something that the unwashed do over there. You don't really ever get your hands dirty with that sort of thing, because you're much too pure for that kind of stuff. And you can do church politics. That's somehow better. But, secular politics, you're not supposed to do that. And so I find myself in this weird time in my life here in Morgantown, just sort of, I got, and I know that purity is not a goal. I mean, there's some ethical purity we need to maintain here, but keeping ourselves too pure just means we get irrelevant really, really fast. And that's not where we want to go as a church. But Jesus, Jesus is just sort of poking at the Pharisees here a little bit, going, yeah, your purity, it's an illusion. Let's just not pretend it's anything else. Let's talk about real things here. And so Jesus recognizes the entanglement that's going on in the world around him. And he says, yeah, I've got work to do, and then I'm going to go to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem. And then he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I've longed to gather your children together. Right? Home to the table in the big black pot. And today, to think about that in terms of Jerusalem, even more crucial than in Jesus' day. In Jesus' day, it was sort of the Jews and the Gentiles. Or the Jews fighting one another. Another big thing, of course, which is Jesus' whole situation. Today, it's the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims all fighting over Jerusalem. And Jesus says, how I wish God's desire is to gather all of God's children together Or it's the Jews and the Palestinians, who are both Christian and Muslim, fighting over these houses and over this piece of land. And Jesus says, I wish we could just gather them all together. And it's very puzzling in Luke. I've been puzzling over this one for years, because Luke is the gospel that really focuses on Jerusalem. Jerusalem, 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 all over through Luke's gospel. And he highlights, and the church grows in Jerusalem, and Paul, whenever he goes on his trips, he comes back to Jerusalem to check things out. So it's very Jerusalem-centered, and yet, as far as we know, Luke is written after the destruction of Jerusalem. Like, Jerusalem gets totally flattened in 70 CE, about 40 years after Jesus dies. And Luke is presumably writing after that. And so why does he talk so much about the centrality of Jerusalem, about a city that's now basically gone? And I don't know the answer to that one yet. Maybe someday someone will come up with a theory that works for me, but I haven't seen one yet. So he's got this central place, and it's, for him, a fairy tale, an illusion. You can go there still, I mean in his day, and you'd see a big pile of rubble. There'd be a few people living in it, but why would you live in a big pile of rubble? Why would you think about this big pile of rubble as the center of God's love and care? Because the Romans showed up around Jerusalem. God did nothing. It's this puzzle. But we don't lack for puzzles. We don't lack for puzzles of the abuse of children by religious leaders. The fact that we continue to elect people who don't seem to care about us. Sometimes we get it right, but so often we get it wrong. Why do people keep doing that? So I think we need to add Paul into this discussion, very briefly, and say that Paul says that God is attempting to transform us. God will transform someday, but also hopefully in an ongoing way. God is transforming the body, us, into something new. And this is still necessary. No matter how many years you spend in church, how many church meetings you go to, no matter how many hymns you sing, that transformation continues to be necessary. God will transform. I think all of this reminds us that safe sanctuary is work. Safe sanctuary takes organizational meetings. Safe sanctuary takes statements and trainings and practice and guidance and leadership and commitment and ultimately transformation. And it's to that we dedicate ourselves to every week